Things that opposition need to consider when preparing a motion, both in terms of likely rebuttal, because it's more important for the opposition to be able to deconstruct the proposition case, but also in terms of discovering, identifying and constructing your own positive matter. That's something that often gets forgotten by opposition. They think it's enough just to attack the proposition's case, and it sometimes can be, but generally speaking it's not. Because then a successful rebuild leaves you sort of floundering. So what's the first thing that opposition need to consider? What's the first question that opposition need to answer? It's not a trick question, no. Very few questions are.
Is status quo okay, or shall we have a counter plan?
Before that, how do you decide whether the status quo is okay?
Or if it can get better, or if it can get
Well,
worse?
which status quo are you talking about?
The thing we're debating about.
Ah! So you have to decide what you're debating about. Newton tells us that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. We know that most of Newtonian physics just isn't true anymore. But at the time he formulated these ideas, he was quite close. So we'll forgive him that. If their policy has some effect that is beneficial, it is likely to have a negative effect somewhere. Okay? Nothing is created out of nothing. If you're improving the financial status of poor people, it's very, very difficult to do without changing the financial status of better off people. Okay? So question why, if the policy does have an effect, the consequences of the policy are legitimate or acceptable, or even desirable. Why are the effects of the policy desirable? And remember your argumentation structure. Each point ends with an idea of the impact of your argument. So why are those impacts things that we should want? Who are we ignoring here? People who are affected by policy are known as stakeholders. And stakeholders, much like the ripples in a pond when you throw a stone in, increase as they are removed from the epicenter of your action. Okay, so your primary stakeholders are the people most concerned with the policy or the effects of the policy. They are the people implementing the policy and the people most directly touched by that policy. You then have your secondary stakeholders, who are people who suffer the knock-on effects of your policy. If, for example, you have a policy that says the state should provide free university education for all citizens, who are the primary stakeholders? Students, principally. And lecturers, because there might be more students going to universities, or the universities themselves. The government, because they're the ones who have to administer and implement the policy. We then have our secondary stakeholders, which might be the families of students who would otherwise have to pay these fees. Might be employers, who might now have an increased number of graduates from which to draw their employment pool. It might be that the increased number diminishes the quality of the degrees. So there might be a knock-on effect there.
Raises the unemployment rate?
Hmm?
Raises unemployment
Possibly does. That has an effect on all people seeking employment, so all workers. This policy has to be funded in some way. That probably has an effect on taxpayers. At the lowest level, everybody is affected by a policy to some degree. It is impossible to live in a society and not be affected by the policies of that society. That's why it's so galling when you hear people say, oh, I don't bother voting because it doesn't really affect me. Really? The economy has no effect on you. Whether you have rights or not apparently has no effect on you. Brilliant. Enjoy breathing in your little vacuum. Right, why are the effects of the policy desirable? Why can't this be done any other way? There's a reason I've written them up in this order. It is because each question involves a subsequent concession to the proposition. This one there is no concession at all. You haven't even identified a problem, everything you say is useless. It's just been a waste of oxygen and time. Okay? Because if you don't identify a problem, then anything you do is just an extra cost. It takes effort, time and money. It's not worth it. However, we will concede that you have identified a problem, but why do you think it can be fixed? We will concede you have identified a problem and it potentially can be fixed. Why do you think this way works? We concede that your way may have some effect, but why are the other consequences desirable or even acceptable? And then finally, even if those other consequences might be desirable or acceptable, why can't this be done differently? That's when you get to the point of possibly thinking about a countermodel, when you have to concede all the rest. Your countermodel or your counterproposition is ultimately a proposition of last resort. Okay? All right. Now let's look then at how you rebut arguments, because rebuttal is key to the opposition's case. There will be some rebuttal on propositions, so I don't think it's exclusive to one side, but it is key to the opposition's case. There are three words, all beginning with R, that often get conflated in debate. Refutation, repudiation, rebuttal. Okay? The definition of each is important. If you refute a statement, you deny the truth or accuracy of the statement. That is all you do. Saying, we disagree, or we think that's wrong, is refutation at its most basic level. But it's obviously not enough in a debate. Repudiation is denying the truth or accuracy of a given statement based on questioning the authority used to make that statement. So looking back to our ideas of classical rhetoric, the ethos of the speaker, the standing of the speaker, if you question their expertise or their use of statistics or their source or the principle they think they've identified as being the wrong principle, that is repudiating what they say. When you rebut something, you question the truth or accuracy of the statement, you question the status or the authority used to make that statement, and this is the crucial bit, you provide counter-analysis to show that the opposite is in fact true. Okay, that is when you rebut something effectively. Yes?
I still haven't understood repudiation.
Repudiation is simply questioning the authority used to make or validate the statement. So questioning the source or the statistic, questioning the expertise of the speaker. Like that. What we want to focus on is that third part of rebuttal. We do want to deny the truth or accuracy of what our opponents say. We do, on some level, want to question the authority they use to back up their statement, the statistic or the source, be whatever it may. But the crucial point is we want to provide some counter-analysis that in fact shows the opposite position to be true. Okay? Now that might be evidence, that might be logical argumentation. But if you're not giving that third element, you are not rebutting arguments effectively. You're simply disagreeing. Okay? Arguments in the playground are very different to arguments in debate. It's not a yes it is, no it isn't, yes it is, no it isn't, yes it is, no it isn't, and the one who wins says it most, or loudest. You don't get to walk away and tell the person that you're not friends anymore and they're not coming to your birthday party. You need to engage with the material and analyse where the flaws lie. Bring out the logical fallacies, bring out fallacies in argumentation, show them to the judge, and then go on to show why your position doesn't suffer from those. Okay? So rebuttal is both destructive and constructive. Right? People make the mistake of thinking rebuttal is all about destruction. It's not. Once you've destroyed an argument, you can then start to construct your own. To use the analogy of architecture, it becomes quite clear what you need to do. When you're building a house, where do you start from? Foundations. You have to dig down below the ground before you can start building. So you have to dig out the earth, prepare the ground for what you're going to say. Provide analysis of the status quo, if you like. You then have to lay foundations, philosophical principles on which we choose to build policy. And then carefully, brick by brick, making sure that each subsequent layer is supported by the layer below it, we can build up to our conclusion. When you're knocking down a house, do you have to start by taking off the roof and then the first layer of bricks and then the second layer of bricks? No. What do you do?
Going to the foundations or the...
Going to the foundation. That can be quite difficult if there's something built over them. Well, you can do two things. You can use a wrecking ball and just smash things in every direction, but that's usually not the most efficient way. Usually not the most efficient way.
Strategy, you take one and then...
Right. Strategy. Play Jenga. Okay? Architects always have what they refer to as the keystone. The keystone is that stone upon which all others rest for their support, ultimately. They rest against each other, but it's all founded upon the keystone. It's most commonly found in an archway. If you've got an archway like this, the keystone is the one that sits there. You take that out, and everything else just crumbles. Your job as a good opposition is to identify the keystone. Identify the argument, the piece of information upon which the rest of the proposition rests. What is it on which they predicate their case that you can remove quite swiftly? Okay? If you get good at identifying that, and this is something that will come with time and practice, you can become very, very effective at destroying a very carefully constructed case just with a well-targeted piece of rebuttal. All right? That might come out in a point of information. It might occur to you in the middle of the debate. Okay? Very, very often, something will hit you and you'll think, that's the bit. If we get rid of that, then everything else tumbles. Alright?
Like, do we present the rebuttals after our constructive case, or like in between only?
Traditionally, your rebuttal comes first and your constructive case comes second. Traditionally. Why do we ask debaters generally to say rebuttal first and constructive second?
It's good for organization. And you can make your rebuttal stronger with your constructive arguments.
Yeah.
Isn't it that digging up ground analogy again? Like laying, like getting rid of what's there already before bringing in new stuff?
Nice, I like that. You're clearing the ground in order to build more easily. I like that analogy. I also think it's psychological. People remember the thing they heard last best. So why do you want to spend your last minute talking about your opponent's material? I wouldn't. Can Don't ask me why. Both at a university and a schools level, the Canadian tradition is you do your constructive material first, because then you can spend more time on it, and then you leave your time at the end for rebuttal. It still seems a little bit weird to me. I find it odd when a Canadian finishes a really strong speech with all the things my opponent said. I can't get past the idea that it's just wrong. It's not wrong, it's different, but it just doesn't sit well with me. I think it's odd psychology to finish talking about your opponent's material rather than yours. So generally speaking, what most of the judges here will want you to do is rebuttal first, constructive second. Wake up, Raoul. Raoul, wake up. It's okay. It's a long morning, I appreciate that. I am going to give you a short break before your exercises, because I think that's important. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about deconstruction of material, how to rebut, how to identify a keystone argument, or when to look for a keystone argument so you can take that out. What else does an opposition need to do?
With regards to rebuttal specifically?
No, just generally. Anything else that we think the opposition needs to do?
I wish to say challenge the definitions, but I'm guessing...
At some point they might have to, yeah. So that's the last aspect, and this is only true for the first speaker, and only in certain cases. One thing that the first speaker needs to do, if necessary, is the model critique. Okay? If that's coming out of second speaker on opposition, it's too late. Right? If you want to critique the model, do it in the first speech, don't spend a lot of time doing it, and then forget about it. Don't make it a mechanistic debate. This is not a debate about how we implement direct democracy, whether we have SMS voting or email voting or whatever. Okay? If that's the debate you want, go and have it somewhere else, please. Because I will be stabbing myself in the ear with a pen so I don't have to hear anything. Okay? Model critique, keep it brief if necessary. Definitional challenges. Again, my top tip, don't.
Yeah.
We've already said that the proposition should define terms in their most natural way. That's what David told you yesterday, the natural interpretation of the words in the motion. I once judged a debate at the schools level where the motion was, this house would protect the rights of the unborn child. What's the debate about, ladies and gentlemen?
What terms are unborn?
Abortion. There you are, it's an abortion debate. It is emphatically not a debate about free university education, which my proposition stood up and said, we will protect the rights of all children, not just unborn children, and the specific right we will protect is the right to a free education. And they thought they were really clever, because opposition just went, all of our material is useless. But opposition won the debate before it had even started, because it wasn't legitimate. Okay? Unborn children do not have a right to free education. Definitional challenges only when absolutely necessary. That is, when the definition provided is truistic or self-proving, or circular definitions. Okay? If the definition is such that the debate cannot happen, that it is in fact undebatable, that's when you should challenge. I once chaired a debate which was about integration versus assimilation, the two different models of dealing with immigration. France favoured an assimilation model, Britain favoured an integrationist model. It is not a debate about whether people of different races should be allowed to make friends with each other at university, because there is no rational opposition to that line of argument. Nobody is going to say, no, we think all universities should be segregated by colour and religion. That's madness. Okay? It's nonsense on stilts. There's a very, very fine British political theorist who once said, the value of any statement may be calculated by the construction of its antithesis, the opposite statement. If the antithesis itself has no value, there is no value in making the original statement. Okay? So when politicians stand up and say, we want to improve standards, it's an empty promise. Because no politician can be expected to stand up and say, we want to lower standards. We want more freedom. No, we want more restrictions on people. We want lower standards for everybody and less liberty. Vote for me. No politician is ever going to do that. So making the original statement has no political value whatsoever. Only challenge definitions when they simply cannot be debated. If they say, we win this debate if water is wet, challenge that. Okay? But don't spend too much time on the challenge. The judges will already be on your side. Okay? The one thing you don't want to do, and this is where psychology comes into it, don't antagonise your judges. Right? People underestimate the value of just being liked. And I've been in enough judging rooms to know that when a debate is very, very close, we will do what Albert Camus said people always do. We will rationalise backwards. Okay? We will decide who won based on a gut feeling, and then we will look for debate reasons why. Okay? Albert Camus, the great French-Algerian philosopher, said human beings are never rational, but they are very good at rationalising. Okay? We make instant snap decisions and then we work out why afterwards. And it's very, very easy for a debate judge to find lines that say, well, you didn't flesh out your argument enough. Nobody really knows what that means. Your argument didn't have as much impact as theirs. Nobody really knows what that means. It means I like them a bit better and I can't explain why. So be likeable. Only do these extreme things when they are called for. If you go around challenging every definition, you'll get a reputation as somebody who doesn't engage in the debate. If it's not the definition you're expecting, but it's still eminently debatable, debate it. Worry about the fact that you weren't prepared afterwards. That means you might need to do a little bit more work in considering the likely lines of proposition, so you've prepared more than one case. It does mean that opposition has to work that little bit harder than proposition, because you don't know every time what case they're going to run. But that's because it's generally harder to construct a case than to knock it down. So proposition probably have a slightly more difficult burden than opposition to begin with. So expecting opposition to do a little bit more work in terms of preparation possibly levels that playing field. It's not necessarily unfair. Okay? You may have a situation where the grounds of the debate are divided, where there are competing principles. In value debates, that's obvious. In value debates, that's obvious. This House believes that security is more important than liberty. Proposition are going to argue that security is more important than liberty. Opposition could, if they chose, argue that there's no difference between the two, but that's a bit of a soft op. Far better, and probably easier in terms of the argumentation, to simply argue for the other way around. If they say security over liberty, we say liberty over security. Don't aim for the parity thing, because you're treading a line that's tilting too close to proposition. It's a soft opposition. So go for the obvious. If in the e-election or direct democracy debate, they say it's about citizens being better democratic citizens because they're more informed, they're empowered, they use their vote more responsibly, and you don't think you can compete on those, find other principles in representative democracy that you can uphold. Okay? What makes good government? Good government is efficient. Good government takes long-term and broad-scope views of things rather than narrow self-interested ones. We think those are better performed in representation, or better fulfilled in representational democracy than in. You create your own comparative. Again, you're giving a metric to the judges that says, you can judge this debate in this way. And when you come to analyse this debate, you'll believe us that efficiency in government is more important than this nebulous idea of empowerment of citizens. Okay? You want to make it easy for the judge. So you might have conflicting principles that are explicit in the motion, or that are implicit when you come to consider the impact of particular policy. Okay? But it's just as important for you as an opposition to have a very clear idea in your mind of the thesis of your argument. Because that fourth stage of argument, that impact, must always link back. This is how we further these aims. This is how we fulfill, we uphold, we defend these principles. This is how we make the people happier, make them better. Okay? If you're using terms like better and happier, define what you mean by better. It's always subjective. Okay? Always subjective. Happier is always subjective. Most terms that are comparative will require some definition. There is no such thing as an absolutely true statement. Alright? And to prove this to you, I'm going to give you what I think is an absolutely true statement, and I want you all to write down a counter-argument. Okay? A proper counter-argument. Not just, I disagree, give me a reason and an example why my statement is wrong. Because I think this statement is so good you can't possibly come up with any counter-arguments. And I want to see if you can surprise me. Here we are. Killing people is wrong. I want counter-arguments, please.
Utilitarianism.
Well, I'm not going to yet. I want everybody to write down their own first. Utilitarianism.
Thank you.
It's fine. The philosophy of John Stuart Mill that if you kill one person to save 10, then it's a morally good act. Philosophy first expounded by Jeremy Bentham in about 1728 and then further developed by Mill afterwards. Mill was a freak though. The guy could speak Latin and Greek at the age of like 6. It was just stupid. Horrible parents to make it do.
I have a classmate that speaks Greek since she was 18. Since she was 8. Sorry.
Ancient Greek?
Yeah.
That's impressive. That's impressive. I didn't learn it till I was 18.
She's such a good person. And now she's taking Latin lessons. She has been taking it for like 6 years. And Arab lessons.
I started Latin when I was 14 and started ancient Greek when I was 18. Because my philosophy professor said there was no good translation of Plato available. So we had to work from the original text.
We have in our schools for 2 years.
Yeah, I'm studying since I was 14 years old and I was studying till 19.
It's useful if you want to be a lawyer. Because lawyers use Latin all the time. But every piece of Latin that lawyers use is translated as the same thing. It means I speak Latin and you don't, so I charge you €800 an hour. But essentially the Latin translation, that's what lawyers are, they are Latin translators. I say that as a lawyer, okay? Okay, killing people is wrong. Give me a counter argument.
If they are dangerous to society.
Okay, give me an example.
A murderer.
Okay, so what would be? So you're talking about death penalty. Okay, so danger to society. We can use the death penalty, state-sanctioned killing, to protect us. Possibly. Next, I'm going to go around the...
Not exactly the same, but it's a mass murderer.
Quantitatively but not qualitatively different. Serial killer, yeah.
Who is dangerous to society?
Okay, you can't all say a danger to society, alright? You're going to have to come up with new ones. I might come back to you later. Right, you need to come up with a new one, because that's the third in a row now, okay? You're not allowed to repeat what other people have said.
I thought about capital punishment, so I have...
You have to think of another one as well.
I have something similar. I wrote that it can be right in a case when it's self-defense.
Self-defense, thank you. That's different. Okay? That is the universally accepted moral case for killing. Everybody has a right to self-defense. International law is predicated on that idea. That if a country attacks me, I can attack back.
I was thinking, I'm not sure about it. At first it was a danger to society, but about maybe abortion.
Abortion, yeah. Some people consider the in utero embryo to be a person. Some people don't. Hang on, I'll come back to you.
Perhaps it's a bit paradoxical, but to send a message about how it's wrong to kill people.
Okay, so as a deterrent.
Yeah.
It's actually possibly the worst deterrent in the world, but it might. Statistically, death penalties work terribly as deterrents. Are we going with utilitarianism?
Yeah,
Okay.
and euthanasia as well.
Don't steal other people's.
I'm not stealing other people.
Yes, you are.
Really?
Well,
First argument is danger for society, and second is place for another people. I think.
yeah. We need to cull the population occasionally. We're too good at curing diseases, people. That's why we have a population crisis. Okay, so we need a population cull. Does anybody know what the sustainable figure of human beings on this planet is? The genuinely sustainable figure? It's about 4 billion people. We're about 3 billion over that, or getting towards 3 billion over that. We need to lose about 3 billion people, and then we won't have a problem with natural resources, food distribution. So I reckon that's China, India, and one other. No, don't ever propose that. It's a bad, bad idea. Yes?
Well, there is a high percentage that they will get a disease from they can die, so we can protect them from getting this.
Yeah, so as a form of quarantine.
Yeah, and
we kill the people who are sick and they don't infect others.
They won't
yes!
die.
No,
yes!
we don't want to torture themselves.
I like this. You're all morally questionable, but I like it.
Like precautionary, if we think that someone can actually do something bad.
Or are you talking Minority Report pre-crime technology? It's a little bit sci-fi, so I'm going to leave that one there.
You said before that we are not rational beings, so we can do whatever we want and kill people.
Yeah, okay. Do what thou wilt. Okay? The great anarchist maxim, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law.
Why is it euthanasia on board if somehow we say...
Euthanasia. Make sure when you're saying that, you say it clearly as euthanasia, not youth in Asia. Okay? We stand today against euthanasia. Good luck with that. There's a hell of a lot of them.
What about in case of war, if another country attacks another country?
Steal other people's. You've said euthanasia.
Okay. I'm allowed to say only one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll run out before we get to the end.
Well, I was about to say like protection, and it's only a self.
Yeah. Okay.
I couldn't come up with anything.
I don't know, I put self-defense too.
there was a lot of arguments, so excuse me if I will be repeating myself, it will be more of a generalization to kill a few in order to save millions.
That's the utilitarian argument. That's essentially what Bill says.
Would probably support most of the arguments is that considering the most religions, when you kill someone, they go to hyper
mandated by religion.
Are reborn.
Mandated by religion. Kill the non-believer. Don't kill the non-believer.
I don't know. This might be a variant of utilitarianism, but I see utilitarianism more about happiness than peace. So for peace, say if you have like an emperor of minorities governing over like a majority case, kill the...
For peaceful ends, the end justifies the means, consequentialist view. That was the rationale used by the United States when they dropped 2 nuclear bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They had calculated that a land invasion of Japan would result in more death and a prolonged war. So it was essentially that approach, a consequentialist approach, that led to possibly the greatest atrocity of World War II.
Survival of the fittest.
Excellent. Evolution. Evolution. We kill off the weak and the rest of us get stronger. One day we will achieve meta-human status and become the X-Men. Emily? Yeah,
Joy.
we're animals. It's instinct. It's nature. Okay? And there's one other which I'm going to put up there. Food. If you're an Argentinian rugby team and you crash in the Andes, you might want to eat your teammates to stay alive. Okay? Sometimes cannibalism is a necessity and not a choice. Possibly not. If you're stranded on a desert island, there's 5 of you, and one of you is weaker than the other 4. I'm just saying, nature's already made that choice.
I think about sacrifice as in what the mother does for the child.
Self-sacrifice, I like it. Finally a selfless one.
And I also thought about testing medication.
Okay, medical testing. See, there are lots of reasons. There are lots of reasons why my initial statement is wrong. Ultimately, I can change my initial statement to eliminate some of those arguments. That's what a good proposition does when it's preparing, is it thinks of an argument, then thinks of all the possible attacks, then thinks how to modify the original statement to limit those attacks. Your job is to go through that same thought process and go one stage further. Think of what Prop will say. Think of the likely attacks. Think how Prop can defend against those attacks by moderating their statement, and then think what attacks you can make. So if I put except in self-defense, okay, that covers self-defense. It might cover death penalty because we might see that as the state exercising defense on our behalf. It covers just war theory because that is nations acting in self-defense. It might cover the issue of self-sacrifice if we allow things like proximity of relationship. A mother is allowed to intervene to save the life of her child. So lots of these I can eliminate, but I can never eliminate them all. The only way I can do so is by making my original argument so complex, with so many subclauses, that it becomes essentially a more difficult argument to make. So your job is to recognise how those statements can be moderated effectively, and therefore why you need to find the right line of attack that can't be easily defended against. There is no way the proposition can construct a statement that cannot be rebutted on some level. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Run to your exercises, please. You're going to get a motion, you're going to get 10 minutes to prepare that motion. That means deciding what kind of debate it is, truth, value, model. Okay? It also means that you're going to have to decide, if there is a model, what likely model you might face and whether there's any major critique of that. But don't spend too much time focusing on that. What I really want you to focus on is building an opposition case on your own, okay? So discovering 3 arguments, properly structured with statement, reasoning, examples, and impact. All of those elements are important. After 10 minutes, there should be 2 arguments that fit neatly into the first speech, 1 argument into the second speech, because that will be the case division when you come to debate. After 10 minutes, you'll present it to the rest of the group, not as a speech, but just as bullet points for discussion, okay? And then everybody else can comment, and then we'll move on. Is that okay and clear for everybody? Excellent. Okay. Mia, pick a number between 1 and 20.
9.
9. This House believes we should lower the voting age to 16.
Yes.
I can't debate on that motion anymore. We carried
And pick another number between 1 and 20.
5.
5. This House believes youth should move outside the European Union to seek employment. There's a reason you're given the same motions each time for these practices. It's so that when you come to debate them, you will be better at it. Number between 1 and 20 that's not 5.
13.
13. This House believes that e-elections would increase the participation of youth. This House believes that e-elections would increase the participation of youth. Dorian, number between 1 and 20 that's not 5 or 13.
3.
3. This House believes that we should... No, I'm not giving you that one. We should require direct democracy at the local level. I'll give you number 4. This House would abolish representative democracy. 14. This House believes the democratic potential of the internet is overvalued. The democratic potential of the internet is overvalued.
7.
7. This House would require politicians to send their children to public schools. State, publicly funded schools, not public schools in the weird English sense of very, very private. 16. Well, this House would require large online social networks to be controlled democratically by their users.
Sorry, could you repeat 14? Because
Yeah, this House believes that the democratic potential of the internet is overvalued.
The first one,
This House believes that European youth should study in universities in their home countries. European youth should study in universities. Remember, you're preparing an opposition to these motions, okay? So you're arguing for the counter to whatever I say. 20. This House believes all politicians should be limited to 2 terms in office. Okay, so you're arguing for the counter to the motion. Everybody got down something at least? Mia, why don't you kick us off?
Should I stand up?
No,
Okay.
don't have to. It's not a speech, it's just
Okay, so...
putting out your points for discussion. Allow other people to make comments as they want.
Okay, you can interrupt me if you want. So, the motion is that this House believes that we should move out of the EU to seek for employment. I assume that the proposition would go in with the quality of life of, I think, individuals, or maybe of the, I think, individuals. And I would firstly define the quality of life. After I heard their definition, I would expand it, I think, and expand it in a way that I say that the quality of life isn't only about the money and the financial situation, it's about also social, like that family is very important to us, and that the feeling that we are on our own territory is also very important for us to feel accepted. So I would start with that their system, that their way, the people will always lose something, that they will lose either, if they stay here, they will lose, I don't know, money because they can't find a job, or if they go somewhere else, they will lose the so many contacts with their family and friends, and they won't feel like they're in their home country. And I would prove in my case that we can have both, because as the motion says, we have the whole territory of the EU, so that's not one country. We are not saying that you shouldn't move out of your own country to seek for employment. And in the EU, we have lots of places to work, and the people can find a job here. So my first argument will be that you have a greater chance of finding the job here, where you are close, where you know the languages, than somewhere else where that's so far away and you have to have visa and everything. And that the market in the European Union is open so that you can work somewhere else. That's your right as the citizen of the European Union. And my second argument will be that you need to develop your home country that provided you education, or if you studied anywhere else in the European Union. And in that way, by developing your home country, you're actually improving the quality of your life and the quality of lives of the other people. So in that way, their principles are accomplished. And one of the arguments will also be that you won't be used to a new culture, and when you're not used to a new culture, you don't feel accepted, and if you don't feel accepted, that's not the sort of quality of life that you want to achieve. So that's harm that they will do, and also that can be considered like the fourth argument, or I could merge it with my third, that the tickets for the flights or for the trains, doesn't matter, are very expensive, and especially if you seek for employment and you can't afford them, and in that way you lose, you have the internet, but that's not the same as you speak to a person face to face, so you lose contact and you miss, and you're nostalgic a bit, and all that influence how you feel and how happy are you, and that influence your quality of life. So.
Okay. Thoughts, comments?
So on the point of quality of life, you talked about how when you move outside of the EU, you lose contact with your family and your social contacts with friends and stuff, and that you're a part of other culture, and so because of that feel unaccepted. But technically, if you go from the Balkan countries to Scandinavian countries, that's inside of EU, and it's still a big cultural difference. And still, you still lose contact with family and with friends, and it's still expensive. So basically what I heard from what you said is that we should stay in our country and not move at all.
No, hang on. I think parts of, because your initial statement about moving abroad was that you lose these things from your home life, but that people could still move in the EU. There might be a tension between those two positions. The EU, you're closer to home, but you're still not at home. So you need to decide whether being at home is important, or whether it's proximity and things like that. And it's true, as the European Union grows, the cultures are vastly different. There's little difference, for example, between Spain and Portugal, or between the Netherlands and Belgium, neighbours. There's not that much difference between Slovenia and Croatia in terms of...
But I think that it can be important...
Compared to the difference between Croatia and Finland, there's a much smaller difference between Slovenia and Croatia.
Not that much.
Yes. Yes.
Us being the Sweden, of course.
I think that we should explain, like, in the European Union, the people are getting used to having foreigners in their countries working there, and the other countries we have to have visas, so they're not that used to having foreigners, and they won't accept you so easy like in the European
And there are other things as well. If you move within the EU, you have all the same rights as a natural citizen of the country in which you're working in terms of workers' rights, by virtue of pan-European citizenship and things like that. So your rights are better protected within the Union. But it still might lead to some of the problems that even moving does. If it is about things like feeling homesick and culture, language being alien.
That's why I chose this with tickets, because it's so much easier to travel inside the European.
Generally speaking, but if you're away working and you're working for minimum wage, even that cheap travel isn't that easy. Student prices don't last forever, folks. Sorry about that. Okay? So think about whether some of the arguments might actually conflict with each other. Whether what you're saying in one statement is undermined by what you're saying.
I don't have a strategy because I don't have enough time to think of one.
Okay.
So my motion was this House believes e-election will increase participation of youth, and since this is a fact debate, I think that the only thing that proposition will tell is it will increase. So my job is to prove.
What are they likely to say
That
to prove that statement true?
Because of e-elections, especially youth, since they are on the internet constantly, will be able to access the voting far easily and faster and won't.
That's the main idea, is that the young generation, your generation, live in the online world. The internet is no longer just a medium, it's a place.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of you use your phone regularly to actually talk to someone rather than text or...
I use.
Yeah? You do? You talk to people a lot? Do you? I think if you look at the usage of broad statistics, people overestimate how much they use their phone as a phone. Because they like to think of it as a phone. So I thought, well, yeah, of course I use it as a phone. And then we forget that things like SMS and stuff like that, that wasn't common 20 years ago. I had one of the first phones that vibrated. It was amazing technology, and that was in 1996. So it's not that long ago. My first computer at home, okay, this has 32 gig memory in it. My first computer at home had a massive 16K of RAM and was programmable and could load games, but they were on a tape, a little cassette that I used to plug into the side of my computer, and it would whir, and you would hear the data going around. Okay, so we've come a long way in a short space of time. So that is the central argument, that the reason young people don't vote in traditional ways is because they don't do lots of things in traditional ways. The damage of that is that young people don't vote in a disproportionate amount compared to old people. That means policies aren't designed for young people. Okay? The reason old people vote is not because they're old. There isn't some magic switch that goes off in you. Yeah, there isn't some magic switch. When you hit 50, you suddenly go, damn, civic responsibility, I must go out and vote. It's because they've always voted. And if something isn't done to increase youth participation, people just won't vote anymore. And that's it. So that will be the thesis coming from the proposition. Good.
My first argument would be about you're not solving the cause of not participating in politics. This is just changing the mechanism. And why? The problem of not showing up is not a problem of assets. Those people are young and mainly are capable of walking there or doing that. It's not the problem that they're incapable of coming to the election. It's the problem that they don't trust the government. They have no interest in politics because they feel like nothing ever changes and that all of them are the same. So you would, in fact, have an impact on a very small amount of people, if at all, have an impact. And it won't be a decrease that is worthy of this policy. The second argument is that by changing that mechanism, that requires money. And it may be wasteful to spend that money on something that, as I mentioned before, won't bring any impact. When instead you can use that money for example, youth education, showing them by doing projects or something, what is their significant effect in political participation. That would be a good alternative for the money.
I will stop you there.
Do you know that these elections today cost more than on the internet if you click, because of the paper and because of the people who has to be there and get paid and the
of course, I will come to that in the third argument. Because of that internet and it's a large space and area and has a lot of extra space for hackers and manipulation, those votes may be not the result of people's decision, but, for example, an anonymous, the group of hackers, could have an attack on the elections and decide who will be the government.
Okay. Thing there is, when you're proving the truth of a statement, it's not your job to solve for all the potential problems with e-voting. There's an assumption implicit in the statement that this would be done in a way that was protected from things like hacking and fraud and stuff like that. So your job is to deal with, if it's done in the best possible way, not in the worst possible way. If you can say, this won't work because it will be done badly, proposition can turn around and go, you know what, we'll do it better than that. Okay? So imagine that the model is the best possible model and then show me why it still fails.
Okay. Well, then I still have the first argument about that the voters, especially young voters, are passive because they don't have trust in governments.
It's lack of trust, it's lack of policies being aimed at young people. That possibly is solved if the participation increases, but the lack of trust is probably more of an issue.
I don't think they would be motivated just because they can do it online.
No, there's nothing inherently about it being online that makes it more attractive. That's a fiction. And it's something that companies have found to their cost. You can't just move your business online and suddenly gain lots of young people as customers. That's not how shit works, thankfully. You're a little bit more discerning than that. So you are young people. What would make you vote? Or do you all vote? Or will you all vote?
I think that the main problem in Croatia and in many other countries is that the young people don't have the political culture. They don't know what's going on. They're not interested in that because no one told them what the politicians can do or either what they are doing.
Change it, Mia.
I think we should implement some kind of, we don't have civil education in school, and I think that in Croatia that would be some kind of solution.
Okay, so that might be an interesting counter-proposal, that if you genuinely want to increase the number of young people voting, the way to do it is, and it's not a counter-model because it's not mutually exclusive, but a better way of achieving their aims might be education in citizenship and civics and things like that. Okay? Explaining and bringing home the importance of participation in democracy. That you can only expect policies to be aimed at you when politicians think you're going to vote anyway. We're in a catch-22 situation at the moment, right? Politicians don't aim policies at you because you don't vote, so they have no interest in doing so. There is no incentive for them to create policy for the people who don't vote. Old people vote, so policies are aimed at old people because they're the ones who vote. Until you start voting, you can't expect politicians to have that incentive. But why would you vote if there are no policies aimed at you?
It's a circle.
Yeah. But you vote, right?
Yes.
Good. It's important, people. People out there die for that right. Don't take it lightly. Okay, Dorian, hit me with thoughts.
My motion is this House would abolish representative democracy. Starting at a set of proposition, I assume that pretty much everybody here would go on direct democracy and not on some anarchy, enlightened monarch stuff. But in case they would, I would just deal with it by the time that I prepared for democracy, for why democracy. Firstly, before I go to the arguments, why democracy over the negation, because democracy is the best middle ground, from maximizing freedom, all these natural rights, yada yada yada.
As long as you don't say yada 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 in the debate, that's fine.
Yeah, but we know why democracy in the first place, so we come to the point why representative democracy over direct democracy, which is relatively hard to think of, but okay, because in both systems you need very, very active people. But if you have active people in direct democracy, you have a relatively dysfunctional system because people have to do every single thing for themselves. But if you have active people in representative democracy, you have a system that functions itself but is simultaneously regulated by the active people. So therefore, in order, if you have people that are active, which you need from the side of proposition and the side of opposition, then at the end, the representative democracy is the thing with which to go. So this is the first argument about the activity of the people, and we have the example of Switzerland where passive people in direct democracy, it's not working. We get to the second argument in the first speech where a representative enables people to continue with their lives because it's not everybody's duty to be active political 24 hours per day all the time. Likely they would have to do it in the direct democracy and better informed decision, better decision, quick decisions, such functionalities of the representative system. And then lastly, I wonder a jewel which representative democracy enables us is to blame people and to actually move on and learn on the system. Okay, he steals, we remove them. But in direct democracy, we cannot remove ourselves.
Yeah.
If it's anarchy or if it's Latin monarchy, it's completely different.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well thought out. Covered various bases, which is what a good opposition does in preparation. Prepares for, sometimes for the unexpected, that ball out of left field that you really can't see coming. And that ultimately means that you're spending less time whilst you're listening to the speech thinking, oh my God, what do I say about this? And more times thinking, that's okay, I kind of expected this, I now have this set of arguments I can fit neatly in. Means that you're much more relaxed and much more comfortable. So that's good. Round of applause, please, for Dorian. That was excellent. Okay, thoughts, comments, anything we might add, anything we might change?
How would you defend with the manipulation that they want to reduce?
Manipulation is the same in both systems.
How could you manipulate if you have the right?
Firstly, manipulation falls on the premise that it's anyway will of the people. Even if all the people are manipulated into the same thing, it's inherently good or inherently their decision to vote for this person. But at the same time, manipulation is in direct democracy even more direct at the people because certain lobbies that want certain laws to pass, they will go directly to the people just for one thing, more aggressively. Just certain lobbies. But here we have two poles of manipulation. Yes and no, but there is mostly one lobby who is more intense, and then we go to this Koch brothers system of America and revolt around it.
But this kind of manipulation, representative democracy causes much more damage because of the corruption and the stealing.
Yes, the corruption thing is solved. If somebody is bad, you don't vote for him anymore.
But then you realize that the another person is also that bad.
But in the representational system, we can at least vote them out. If it's 30% of a population in direct democracy that are susceptible to that corruption, we can't just remove 30% of the population. That's problematic.
But how would how would the corruption work in the system that is direct democracy?
Because
find a way.
Yeah. Corporations buy people's votes, promise them things. People make empty promises because there's a lack of information or a poverty of information. So politicians can promise things that are unrealistic. Like when Homer Simpson was in charge of waste disposal in Springfield. And he spent the entire budget in a week because people just didn't understand. Don't use The Simpsons as an example in debates, though. It's not real, okay? The clue is in the yellow people. Okay, next.
Well, my motion was this House believes the democratic potential of the Internet is overvalued, and my first is a fact motion, and my opinion is that the first opinion is that we have enough freedom on the Internet. So, okay, we have enough freedom because we can see what is happening on the world. We don't have banned anything. We can see how other countries work, and we are not just in our country. You can see what is happening all around the world and seeing news from foreign countries, and we can see how democracy is working all around the world. So in democratic system, the internet is not overvalued. As a evidence, I can show the countries where democratic system is not working, like in China, their internet is banned, and if internet wouldn't be some key to the democracy, it wouldn't be banned in countries where democracy is not working.
The countries generally that have a kill switch tend to be the ones where we have problems with the democracy or the nature. China believes itself to be a democracy, let's be clear about this.
Yeah, it's
People's
Well, they do vote and they do have a choice of candidate. It's just that all the candidates are from one political party. That's the bit they can't quite grasp yet. But Chinese democracy is not just a really bad comeback album by Guns N' Roses. Okay, it is a concept. It's just slightly different.
It's not really working well.
No, but I think that's a really good line, because the proposition line, and you need to think about the likely proposition line, is that we overestimate the importance of particularly social networking when we look at things like the Arab Spring and the pro-democracy movements in Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, to some extent Syria, Libya, keeping those pathways of communication open with the West. The statistics are quite stark. Very, very few of the people in Egypt even have internet access. To claim an internet revolution when you have possibly about 1% of the population using the internet on a daily basis is a little bit optimistic. But I really like the line that you're not in fact trying to prove the internet's democratic value, you're showing that anti-democratic states don't like the internet, and that's a nice twist. That's really good.
And maybe the second point is that if internet would be overvalued, people would believe that it can save them.
Yeah.
And people in this time are so skeptic that they don't really believe on the internet.
Yeah.
So this why the internet isn't overvalued.
Also, let's look at the successful protests going on at the moment. The Gezi protest, for example, in Istanbul. The most successful part of that, the most compelling part of that, was that man standing silently reading a book and just refusing to move. And gradually more and more people. And it's this sort of outdoor library that's been created in the middle of Istanbul. I have a friend, Janakar, wonderful debater, who's there with the protesters at the moment. And people from Istanbul are coming and leaving piles of books for these people to carry on reading when they've finished one. It's absolutely fantastic to see this popular movement. It's got bugger all to do with the internet. So I think that's really, really good. It's a nice line, it's an interesting line of analysis, and it works very, very well. It makes for an interesting debate. It's a very good effort. Another round of applause. Okay, next.
The motion was about politicians and the kids, and that the politicians' kids have to go to public school.
Yeah.
And the proposition would probably say something about that the politicians will care more about the public schools or something like that, and that they're going to bring politics and their decision closer to the lower society or something like that. And
that they will be able to relate better to the people, I would say.
Exactly.
Sounds more polite than the lower society.
On the side of opposition, I would say that that's actually that all doesn't matter, because the first principle that's important in this debate is about freedom of parent to choose what their kids going to do, and that's actually my first point. That's talking about duty of a parent, and firstly, I would point out that parents from politicians' kids are not different than any other parents. So actually they have the same rights as others.
Yep.
So actually their duty is to choose the best school and the best possibility for their children to develop and to educate. So why is that? Because firstly, because these parents know the best, what's the best for their children, and secondly, because they have a duty to make their kids the most educated as possible.
Uh-huh.
So if the second point is about if we're living in a democratic system, we should be all equal. We should have all the same rights. If we have the same duties, on the other side, we should all have the same rights,
yes.
And we should have all the same possibilities.
Okay. Thoughts, comments?
I think maybe a point for the side of opposition here is that lives of politicians are drastically different than lives of other people. They're not at home a lot of the time. And in case they want for the child to actually grow up relatively normal without their parents, it's not so very beneficial for the child itself to go to a public school, because we know that public schools are not the best opportunity, and in case that they already have a bad situation, why put them even in a worse situation with less human contact, and even then they'll be more exposed because there's children of politicians and so on.
I was at school with a local politician's kid. We used to beat the crap out of him because we couldn't beat his dad up for the policy, so it was the next best thing, right? I think that's something we fundamentally forget. The animosity that exists towards politicians very often extends to anybody close to them.
In Maribor we had this protest, huge protests, against our mayor, because he was stealing and everything. Really, the whole city was...
An elected official who was corrupt. Say it, sir!
It was absolutely brilliant. Like half of the Maribor was on the streets. But anyway, and my schoolmate was his daughter.
Right.
And she actually had to drop whole school year and not show up because it was too dangerous for her. And we were in a gymnasium where cultivated people were supposed to be, but it didn't.
Oh yeah, I was in a grammar school. This wasn't like some inner city comprehensive which was rough. We were all relatively posh kids. We still beat the shit out of politicians' kids, though, because that's what people do. You take it out on the people you can reach, and the politician very often is removed from that. So if we make the child bear the brunt of it, it's just not fair on the child, really, is it? So I think that's a good line. I also like the line about, just sort of normal lifestyle and things like that. The other thing I think you can say is that, because proposition are obviously going to say this makes politicians care more about the education system. It's their bloody job to care about the education system anyway, isn't it? That's how they get re-elected, so they've already got an interest in improving educational standards or improving health standards. It's the same debate whether we say send the kids to public school, use public health systems. It doesn't really change the nature of the arguments for either prop or op. But good job.
So my real motion was our house believe that a big social network should be controlled by democratically by the users. But my English is not so good as I want to be. So the house believe the social network should be controlled by democratic state. So I make two motions. First of all, I make my motion because I like more. I think the proposition make value safer internet, and the first argument that they can fight against terrorism and neo-Nazism because they can fight against them, and the second argument is can protect young people, something like that. And I think the opposed can said the first argument could be freedom of speech, that we can is fundamental right, and second is can be used wrong, that somebody use our information, some politics use information about his wife or so. And the second is the right motion about users. I think the proposition also safe for internet or something like that. And first argument should be people don't know what a social network know, that people are silly and social network has information, personal information about them. Second argument is protect people against selling that the social network can sell their personal information to advertisement company, and that's protect people against this. And the third argument is that the social network have many information, as somebody can steal them, some hackers or terrorist organization, and it could be very bad. So, opposition said that its own choice, that I think up the that I want to be in the social network, and I know what the social network say. So it's my own choice. And second, it's not effective. No, it's the same reason I know what the companies say. So it doesn't matter, because I can only control this. And if I really sign up, I allow this. And I can nothing to do with this, because I control this. Oh, nothing.
Cool. You finished?
Yes.
Okay. A couple of things there. I think the lines of opposition are fine, but I think you're trying to construct a case for the proposition that's a little bit extreme. Okay? This isn't about terrorism or neo-Nazis or anything like that. This is simply about Mark Zuckerberg deciding something and not asking Facebook users what they think. And Facebook users usually go, oh, but Facebook is ours. And guess what, guys? It's not. It's Mark Zuckerberg's. He owns it. He can do what the hell he wants with it. If you don't like it, ask for your money back. Oh, wait! You never paid any. Get over it. Right? These are essentially private enterprises. The fact that they choose to offer you the service for free does not change the nature of them being commercial enterprises. Twitter raises revenue through usually promoted tweets, and that's how it deals with advertising in that sense. But it still allows users to block those promoted tweets so we don't see them. Okay? Facebook fills your page with adverts. But you know what? If that's the price you have to pay for a free social networking site, what would you rather do? Pay $20 a month just for it to be advert free? How many people would that exclude from ever using it? So that's really where the debate is whether the democratic control would in fact make the system better for the end user. Would it increase access in terms of numbers? And it would probably decrease access, because it would mean that most people would vote against things like intrusive advertising and stuff like that. It would also mean that specific content which Facebook users suddenly decided was unacceptable, but for which there might be a niche group who wanted, doesn't appear anymore. Maybe Zuckerberg is better placed to make those decisions than the average user. How do we feel? Do we think Facebook should be a more democratic environment? I think in some respects it probably should. They had a poster that made some kind of joke about a woman unable to defend herself and things, and lots of people complained and said, this is offensive, please take it down. And Zuckerberg's response was, this does not break Facebook's policy on inciting hatred or violence. It's like, it's a joke about rape, dude. How is that not inciting hatred and violence? Get over yourself. But, you know, because there are some things we might want to change, that doesn't mean the whole thing should then be controlled democratically. How many people use Facebook regularly? I'll give you a clue.
5 million.
If it were a country, it would be the third largest country in the world after China, or third most populous country in the world after China and India.
5 million.
500 million regular users.
I remember 5 years ago, I had to write a paper on it. I remember explicitly it was about 5 million.
Yeah. Twitter's at 100 million now.
And nobody uses Twitter. Like
100 million people do.
Here.
You just don't know about the people.
Yeah, I do. I use it far more than I use Facebook. But it's weird, it's an older demographic on Twitter. Twitter users tend to be between 30 and 45, whereas Facebook users are almost all under 25. Almost. But yeah, if Facebook were a country, it would be the third most populous country in the world. After China and India, it would be Facebook. Now, China already has problems, as we know, with Chinese democracy. India doesn't fare particularly well on the democratic scale. There's an awful lot of patronage, corruption, political dynasty, problems like that. The idea that you could administrate easily a 500 million strong pure democracy, and it would be a direct democracy. Let's not forget, we're not creating a representational democracy on Facebook. This is 500 million direct users voting on every issue. It would be insane. Your entire Facebook feed would be campaigns for the next vote. It would just, on a practical level...
I would avoid Facebook.
Yeah, well, I avoid it anyway. It's got pictures. Like, I go on Facebook to avoid the people I know. I go on Twitter to find the people I don't. Okay.